Good morning, everyone. So, since last week, we've only gotten closer to Purim, and we'll certainly focus on something related to that. So, this time, on this occasion, I'd like to discuss the following pair: the drinking Adela Yada and the potential crimes and misdemeanors that might ensue if one drinks Adela Yada. So this time we'll start directly with the Shulchan Aruch. So if you look in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Reish Tzadik Hey Sif Beis, so the Mechaber, all he has to say on the subject is the following. Quote, Chai v'inish to b'simah v'puria ad l'yodam in order hamel baruch mordechai. That's all the Mechaber has to say on the record. But there's a very, very long, lengthy Haggadah of the Ramah there. And the Ramah begins by saying, some say you don't have to get that drunk. Just drink a little more than usual. You fall asleep, and by sleeping, you don't know the difference between Aram and Baruch Mordechai. And the Ramah is not taking a particular side. You want to do a lot, you want to do a little. As long as you have the right intentions, your heart's in the right place. All right, then there's an arichas in the middle about other things, and then at the end of this Haggadah, the Ramah adds, some say that if you harm your friend due to the Simcha of Purim, you're exempt. You can get away free. Also later, in the next Siman Tofesh Tzadik Vav, there's another Haggadah of the Ramah. The Ramah starts by saying, Mashinagu, Lilboish Partsufim B'Purim, is masquerade. Then you have the famous issue of a Gever Levish Simlas Isha, of Isha Kli Gever is cross-dressing. So it's not an Isser because the Kavanah is not for inappropriate behavior in this case. You have a unique situation where it's L'Simcha Ba'alma, it's just for good cheer. Same would apply to Levishas Kalayim de Rabbanon, which is its own discussion. V'yesh Oimrim D'Oser, Aval HaMinig Kisvara Rishayna. The Ramah actually puts his thumb down and says the minig is still like the first Svara. And he adds, people who are grabbing from each other in a joyous way, in a playful way, that's also not stealing. That's the minig. As long as you don't cross any lines to be determined by the people running the city. And the source is the tshuva of the Maharimins. So, a lot of subjects and topics here. Now, the actual discussion relating to what's the chiyuv of drinking, what are you mechuyev to drink, and the yeshemim that you're not, that's its own topic. I'm not planning on getting into that, but close, we know that there's a machlekes about this since the time of the Rishonim, and in a certain sense, there's still people pulling each way up until today. You'll still have people that come out and say there's no chiyuv, and there'll be people that say, or at least act like there is a chiyuv. And it seems like, just as it was then, till now, there's always it seems like more of a minority that conspicuously refrain from partaking in overdoing the festivities, but the majority either are actually getting drunk, or at least in theory are open to getting drunk. So that's one topic. Another topic we're not going to get into is the Simlas Isha, dressing up on Purim Mechlal, and specifically this idea, which the Ramah actually seems to endorse. Also its own topic. I actually once gave a shir on it somewhere else last year. But I want to talk about the issue of causing damage, causing harm. Now, this din actually that's cited twice in the Ramah is actually not directly what I want to talk about, because when he quotes in Tavish Tadakei B'Shem Tunim Sadasher and Tavish Tadakva B'Shem Ari Mintz, the gather over there is not really related to the drinking. But more, B'Tzad is a special gather of the day. It's like a kind of day where certain rules are relaxed. You can get away with certain things you can't get away with on other days, and it's like everyone's moment is a little hefker, so to speak, on that day. As long as you're whatever you're doing is in a friendly, joyous way, not that you're waking up that day with the intentions of wreaking havoc. And for that reason, it's lav dafka Purim, but really any time like that. any Zman Simcha, you see the Rishonim talking about any Zman of Simcha that is likely to end up with this kind of behavior. And if you look in the Maharimintz, which the Ramah is citing in Tavish Sadik Vav, so it actually goes together. He brings it together with the idea of the Simla Seisha. The Ramah brings it together because in the source there, it goes together. According to Maharimintz, it's all one concept, that in this kind of misgaret, this kind of context, you don't have bad intentions, ill intentions. You mean the Shem Simcha. So to quote Maharimintz, he ends off in his tshuva, Mishum Simchas Purim lo yikri gezel, kivin she'en oisel manas ligzel or viach. You're not doing it for the sake of benefiting from someone else. El Mishum Simchas Purim, it's just in the spirit of Purim. So Achinami, the argument he was making, Nidin Didan, with the clothes, Lishna, no different, kivin she'en mechaven l'niyov fel Simchas Purim. The reason why it's also is mechaven l'niyov, and here there's other reasons to be doing it. And he adds, throws in a line, the gezel of Rayas Yetzer Echad Lehen, the same underlying Yetzer somehow. So if we matter this, we matter that. Ve'en laharach b'drosh zeh, and that's where he leaves it. And like I said, I'm not getting into this issue per se as well. By the way, the Gabi this did not fully clear what actually the halacha would be Lamaisa today. As Mana Rishonim, it sounds like, even up to the Ramah, it sounds like it wasn't like a side thing. It sounded like this was a central way of expressing happiness and joy and excitement on a day like this. Mashenkin today, we probably wouldn't describe it that way. That like, a central part of having a good time is by, grabbing things and stuff like that. If you look in Aruch HaShulchan here, the Aruch HaShulchan Taka says, "V'achshav b'v'niseinu harav imorva kol simcha," whatever simcha they had in the time of Rishonim, we don't have that anymore. Ve'eino anoigim l'smayach kol kach ad sheyavi lehezek. We don't get that carried away that it ends up with the damages. So v'lochen achshav kishehizik chayev l'shal. Aruch HaShulchan actually says today you'd be chayev. But despite what he says, it's still common today to a certain extent, maybe not as the central way of expressing oneself, but as sort of a side thing. It comes along with the festivities. Someone who opens his house to a bunch of people drinking, he's probably going to expect that some things are going to get knocked over, someone's going to walk in and just grab something. So it is still, to some degree, part of the simcha. In Aruch HaShulchan, it sounds like that at least he and his surroundings must have been particularly cult, so to say, that to them it was talking mamash unheard of. The way he's describing it, there's mamash unheard of for any hezek to happen as a result. That probably doesn't represent the average person. So Adayim, it's not clear how exactly you would paskin, and I guess it really depends on what the exact circumstances were and what was going on. It's also interesting to note, again, that you really have two sides in the Ramah himself. On the one hand, he's the one who introduces the shita that you don't have to be mishtaker so much. Although he adds, not that he's taking a side, but he did introduce both sides. And on the other hand, he's the one introducing the halacha that, by the way, you can get away with stuff due to the simcha. Again, like I said, it's not really connected to the drinking per se, but interesting to note. But I want to elaborate more on the hezek, damages, and things like that are a result not of the general spirit of Purim, but specifically due to drinking. Now, there are a number of people who are mitzayin to a very unique passage in the words of the Ramah elsewhere, which are a bit in contrast to the impression you might get from just looking in Shulchan Aruch. And you can find it in where is it? You can find it in a sefer from Mechir Yayin on Megillas Esther. Now, what is the nature of the Ramah sefer Mechir Yayin on Megillas Esther? So, just to provide some background on that, it's sort of a pirush according to the order of the psukim. That's how it's the format. But it's not really a regular pirush. He's not coming to explain the Megillah really. He's coming to provide to offer an interpretation of the whole story of the Megillah, Lefi Ruchnius. But in his unique style, which is a blend of philosophy and Musar and the Teres HaNefesh, as I'll describe now in short. So generally, and in short, the way he sees the story is he divides it into three. The first part of the Megillah, the party, that represents the youth, the very young years of a person, and that's a very wild time, like the party. And Vashti represents what the person is up against. The Vashti within him is the issue at that time. Then at some point, at the end of that period, get rid of Vashti, you replace it with something better. Then the second part, the middle of the Megillah, the Gzeira, he says, corresponds to the adult years, when a person matures, his inner battles are a little more mature. So then it's the Mordechai in his nefesh against the Haman. And Esther is sort of there in the middle, and Mordechai has to bring Esther to his side to do what Mordechai wants. And the final part, after Haman is killed, after finally get rid of Haman, so that, he says, corresponds to the older years, person ages. So then everything's already running according to the Ratzon of Mordechai and Esther. And when it comes to the Yom Tov at the end and all that, so he starts talking in terms of reaching the level of Nevuah. And he says it's a darga of Nevuah, that's Yudalid, Yad Hashem. And then there's a darga of Tezvav. Tezvav is Yud K, that's Tamamish, No Hashem himself. He says the Yidden in Shushan, they got to the level of Yudalid. V'nachu, and then they rested on Tezvav, which means they didn't reach that level of Tezvav. And everyone else, V'nachu b'Yadal, they didn't even get to the level of Yadal. Yud Gimel is a lower level, a high level of Seichel. What's the Mishnah V'Simcha? He says Mishnah V'Simcha is Miram is actually to the Sudas Levyasan and the Sharabar in the future. So whatever you didn't reach now, whatever you didn't accomplish now, that's your Mishnah V'Simcha for the future. That's what you're going to attain then. So whoever was in Shushan, whoever's a Mukav Chayma, which represents someone who has more of a Shlemos, so he already reached the Darga of Yadalit. So his Mishnah V'Simcha, his Lasad Lava is going to be the Darga of Tezvav. But Yehudim Aprazim, those who are in the cities that don't have a wall, so they're not B'Shleimus even now, so their Mishnah V'Simcha is even the Yadalid. So then he gets to the word Simcha Mishnah V'Yamtav V'Shleich Manas Ishlarei. And he writes that this seems to be linked to the Chazal Chayav Adam LeBesurim B'Purim. And so how is he going to fit this in? How is he going to interpret this? He says it's like the Nimshal. I'm saying that the Sudas Purim refers to the Sudas Levyasin in the future. And in the future, there won't be any Haman, as I've explained them in my Pirush. Haman, the Yitzhahara, is going to be gone. So that's what the Chazal is saying. Asad Lavai, the Besumah will be that it won't know that Lo Yada Ben Ar Haman, the Baruch Mordechai, Ki Lo Yedu Mao Haman Klal. There's no Haman. What is Haman? They won't know. So that fits with his Mahalach of explaining everything Baruchnius and it's Asad Lavai. So this detail of Ad Lo Yada included. Then he says, V'oid in Italy, I have another way of explaining this Chazal, also in line with something else that we explained. It says you have to be Mesume Ad Lo Yada. So he says you can teach that as long as the Lo Yada, as long as you don't know, that's when Lebesumi. But once you are Yedea, Mishayeda Aser Lishtaker. He flips it around. Once you know the difference, so then you shouldn't get drunk. So he says you have the stage of the Yaldus, the younger years. That's someone at that age still hasn't figured anything out. He doesn't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. That's someone, the youthful turmoil. So that's where the Besume comes in. Drinking fits in that context. But once someone matures and ages and understands what Haman and Mordechai are about, he has the Mordechai, he has the Seichel, so then drinking doesn't feel appropriate anymore. Like it says in the Gemara Brachas, don't drink and don't sin. It goes together. So here he's already explaining the drinking Kipshuta, but the Ad Lo Yada is still not Kipshuta. But it fits in with a different thing that he explained about the different stages of life. And it's not clear to what extent is he talking like actually practically, or is he just speaking b'drash. At any rate, it doesn't seem like he's talking about Purim at all in this interpretation. It just seems like he's saying, someone who's at this stage of life goes along with drinking, and at this stage of life doesn't go along with drinking. And now, and at this point he abandons his whole way of explaining things. He just says, but if we're already talking about it, when you're, I understand this pshat, it's because the mitzvah of Purim is to drink. And you're not going to be able to get away without drinking at all in Purim. You're for sure going to start drinking. So he says, you should deliberately make a point of drinking as much as you can Shiagia l'shechrusei shalait, until you're completely blacked out. Because then the Rama says you'll be potter even if you sin and even if you do averis, then we'll be able to say that it was all ba'inus. But if you don't drink enough and then you do averis, which also happens, then forget you're chayiv. So you're just getting yourself in trouble. You're drinking and then you're doing trouble. So he says, it says shikar shaharag narag. So if a shikar commits a murder, we punish him with death, unless he reaches shechrus shalait, unless he's completely unaware of what he's doing. So therefore, it's kedai. That's the chayiv inish kedai to reach that stage, so that you don't know what's but you don't know the difference between einish l'schar. You don't know the difference between right and wrong. Or the punishment that you get for right and wrong, which is the punishment that Haman got versus Mordechai. So if you're at that stage of cognitive blankness, so therefore you're not the mazik anymore. So even if you sin, you're not punished. He says that's why the Gemara says the Maisa of Rava and Reb Zera, that the Gemara is endorsing. The Gemara is saying this is what ideally should happen. You get so carried away, you commit murders, you have no idea what you did. Perfect. That's how it should be done. And then you don't get punished. So it's great. That's what the Ramah says in Mechar Yayin, shtickle pella. And according to what he's saying, that this is the Yisayid of Chayiv Inish L'Basumim. So I want to focus on this halachic concept that the Ramah invokes, Shechrus Shalait, you can get away with things, and to see how far this really applies. Now, once we're talking about this din of Shechrus Shalait, so then it really doesn't have much to do per se with Purim itself, the specific day. If you're potter any day. What the Ramah is saying here is that dafka on this day, there's a certain kavanat chila, you're going in with a certain intention, but you have to clarify that. Avad, even according to the Ramah, if the person gets drunk in order to go go on a crime spree, surely that's not under the excuse of Shechrus Shalait. Surely that's not what the Ramah meant, and we'll touch on that later. Maybe this is also the place to throw in a disclaimer regarding the Gzeira or the Takana or whatever you want to call it of the Rebbe drinking, which Dafka the Rebbe said is to use the model of the Ramah, Yemei Hanaros, or the more mature years, Dafka for the Yemei Hanaros, when according to the Ramah maybe drinking goes along with it, but it's based on the same logic essentially, just flipping it around. Because the Yemei Hanaros is a time that someone can drink and cause trouble, so that's why you shouldn't. When you're older, when hopefully you're not causing trouble anyway. So the way I understand what the Rebbe's Gzeira was, that ultimately it was based on the results, the behavior, the ensuing behavior, and it was connected to specific incidents of people that said certain things, and people that did certain things, and the Rebbe was reacting to that and saying, well, in that case, this is what we need to do in order to prevent those things from happening. So if somehow, for some reason, someone is not being careful with the drinking, so that at least should be nizar on the tam, and at least be nizar, but dibur b'maisa, not to say anything or to do anything that's problematic. And especially since fi halacha, you are responsible for everything you say and do, unless you reach that level of shechrus shalait, which we'll see is not the standard shikr doesn't reach that level. That's the disclaimer. So now, if we look at the halachic sources regarding shechrus shalait, so first of all, what shilas does this come up in? So generally, you can divide it into business, masu matan. People said they were going to do something or did a certain transaction, and then they said I was shikr. The questions of hezek, if you cause damage while inebriated, are you responsible? Then you have questions like kiddushin, things like that. Person is mekadesh, and he says I was drunk. So what do we do now? And then you have the questions of dvarim shebekdusha. Can you mitzvah someone to a minyan? B'negei shchita, sheichid is drinking. And then, so that's the topics. But then you also have the specific halachic discussions. So the first one I want to discuss is, how do we even measure? Let's say we're saying that once you reach this line, the halacha changes. But where's the line? How do we determine? So we'll start with the tshuva of Mahari Mibruna. So Yisrael of Bruna lived in the 1400s. He was one of the big paiskim in Germany at that time. He's the Talmud of the Tumas Hadashin and the Mahari Vail, not to be confused with Mahari Bel. He was a Rav in Brno. Today it's in Moravia. Today that's in the Czech Republic. Today it's pronounced something like Brno. And that's where he sent tshuvas to people from. And then his life continued. He had a stage after that as well, but we'll leave it at that. And he was considered at one point, once his Rebbeim passed away, he was considered like the leading Paisik in Ashkenaz, and it's like an interim period. It's like between the era of the Rishonim and the Achreinim. It's just around when the printing press is being invented. And his psakim, he's also one of the influential Paisikim of that Tkufa, quoted a lot by the Ramah, etc. So we find the following story in Shut Marim Bruna Sim Nereish Samachay. It starts off, it says, Shalom Lachem Kadisha Chabura Kadisha, the Lemberg. So this is an early mention of the city of Lemberg, which we know, Lemberg, Lvov, or today it's in Ukraine, it's called Liviu, something like that. So he says, Al Dvar Haretzicha. We're going to start off with murder. Regarding the murder in your city, that Oisei Nachman HaRasha started the murder. The Oisei Simcha finished the guy off. So what happened? So the testimony was that Nachman started hitting a guy by the name of Nissen with a knife on his head and caused a serious head injury. And in the testimony in the city of, he says, Prislu, which presumably is Breslau or Wrocław, as it's called today. It's in Poland. Now, it's Breslau. Wrocław is not particularly close to Lemberg, but it's actually closer to Brno. And I guess you'd have to look into the details of where the word Bati Din, where Yiddishkeit in Poland was holding, to understand the different cities involved. Although from the end of the tshuva and from the next tshuva, it seems like the Shaila was B'chlal coming from Posen. So it seems like maybe the people who committed it were from Posen and the Shaila came from there, and unclear. So in the Eidos, they heard from the Eidim that the injury already from the first guy was so bad that he couldn't get up anymore. And it sounds like he was dragging him around by his head. And then Nachman screamed to Simcha, you should go finish it off. So Simcha went and he hit him with 8 shekoid in coil. Maybe he means like a lump of coal, I don't know. Until completely knocked him out. And while he was lying in front of him, he hit him a few more times. And one of the witnesses, Moshe B'Rab Asher, attested that the second guy, Simcha, was a shikar. And once he was at it, he just, for the record, he pointed out that Nissen, the victim, was an Ama Oretz Gomer. Afilu ois achas lehikr. Nishkekent ken tzuras os. V'lo yiniach tefillin miyomov. Never put on tefillin. V'ein shum lachluchas bay. He's got nothing going for him. Just as a matter of record. And in fact, he even started Hu Hischel. He actually started the Malay. He took to Eitzim and to throw at Simcha first, and that's how this whole thing got out of control. And they wrote that Simcha has charata and he wants a tshuva. And Nachman has no charata and doesn't want a tshuva b'chal. And L'maisa Nissen died of his injuries. So he says, Atem karasem l'Nachman u'lesimcha karasem reitzeach. Not actually in the text we had before, but he says, I noticed that you decided to call the second guy the reitzeach. So I say they're both reitzchem. And what happens when you have two reitzchem like this? Al pi halacha. So they're chayav b'dinei shemayim and they're pater b'dinei adam. And he brings from a gemara that it's a gzeres hakosov, that even though each one of them, the injuries that each one caused was enough to finish him off, but nazafal, the Chiyav Misa is off, but that doesn't mean that the person's any less of a murderer. It's just, the point being that you can't always correlate the halachas of Chiyav Misa to determining how horrible a crime is. So even though they're pater migzeres hakasav, but they're still Chayav Misa b'dei shemayim, b'yesh machnisim l'kipa. This might be a situation where you want to lock someone away, which, like modern justice, where you lock someone up for being violent in that kind of way.
This is like people that they lock them up for good, for like when they take away life, or that's... I'm
not sure if that's what he's suggesting. He just mentions V'yesh machnisim l'kipa. he's trying to just make the point that it's that doesn't mean that because you're potter, so therefore halacha, Judaism, Jewish ethics looks at this as okay. The point is that it's very not okay. It just happens to be that the prescription of misa doesn't always apply, even when things are very atrocious and horrible. And you also have the Gemara in Ksubis that Afagav the Dal Misas Batlu, but you're still Chayav Misa B'dei Shemayim. The idea that the Misa, the Chayav Misa itself is not always relevant to the question. And he says, and even if it turns out that Nachman had already caused a very serious injury and made him a treifa, a nikav akrom shel meichai, so now he's already a treifa, but Simcha would still be Chayav Misa B'dei Shemayim, because if Nachman had only made him a treifa and that's it, Rava says it's an hedge in your potter for making someone a treifa, and Tesu says it's Laman Amar that someone who's a treifa could still live. So, yeah, so that means Fakar, he's still alive in a certain sense. He says even a shogeg who commits a murder, technically, you can go and the Goyal Adam can retaliate and kill him for what he did. So you see, even a shogeg's action is very serious. So he's trying to establish that don't take this situation lightly. And this Nachman hit him actually with a knife. And Makas Cherev and Halacha, when there's an injury from a blade that's considered very serious, from Chal Shabbos for that, Kli Barzel and Nosno by Taita Shir, other things which we have to measure. Was this a murder weapon? Was it not? When it comes to metal, we say even the smallest amount of metal can be a murder weapon. And he hit him on the head, Taka, where you can make him a treifa. And even if Simcha had not done anything, and Nissen had died of that injury that Nachman did, Nachman would be chayev, even if it took a year for Nissen to die, and you would, be down him in Beis Din if it was Basra. If it hadn't been the combination, just Nachman's behavior, that would be enough to consider him liable. And he says, Chalal says in Sanhedrin, I made him Yodei El Chavei Nek Rasha, lifting a hand, you're Rasha. And if you hit someone, the Gemara says you might deserve to have his hand chopped off. And Rav Huna Taka used to implement this psak. Rav Huna Katz Yada. And even the share of a person that killed someone, Ba'al of Chayav Misa B'dei Shemayim, Elamai, if you pay, you get rid of the Chayav Misa. But that's, right, Rashi says. So there's no way around the recognition that this was a very, very, very terrible crime. P. So I say, he says, the first guy I say, Mereshayim Yotza Resha, he was Chayta and he was Machdi Simcha. That's what the testimony said, that he told Simcha to kill him. And then he gets to this question. The Eid Echad said that Simcha was a shikr. So he says, Lav Klumhu, that's not relevant. It means absolutely nothing. The Kol Zman Shlo Higil Shechrus Shaloit, the Hasam Layada, B'Shechva V'Kuma. So we always use the term, the Gemara used the term Shechrus Shaloit, and why are we referencing Loit? Because Loit famously got drunk and was involved in some very problematic behavior. And we say in the pasuk that he had no idea, beginning and end. So he says, that's actually the definition. You want to know the definition? How do you know where you draw the line? The definition is if lo yada b'shechva v'kuma. And Simcha himself admitted to the whole thing in the morning, kipikeach gomer. So if Simcha knew the next morning what happened, so that means the whole shechrus is irrelevant. It says for sure both chayv and tashlumim, because nowadays you have the Dalet Dvarim, Tzari B'Shabbos Beishas, even though there's machlekes about that, exactly of whether we're down the Dalet Dvarim, but things different talachas and shittas, and our minig is that we do based on doesn't force at least part of the Dalet Dvarim. And he says, Anya Rabbeinu Tam and Sefer Yashu said that in the case of a murder, he's responsible to take care of the Nirtzach's family because he took away their parnasa. It says in Agoyes Hasheri, it says that really you're chayiv misa, so you shouldn't be chayiv in another punishment, but you're still chayiv b'dei shemayim, and especially where he's not getting the din misa, so then for sure he has to pay money. You said that Nissen was an Amar, it's Gomor, that's not enough to make this okay, to make him potter. because we do have the Amaretz and Psachim where it says that it's a mitzvah to kill an Amaretz. But if you look in the different Yishayim and how they define the Amaretz that the Gemara is talking about, none of them apply over here. And even if it turns out that this guy somehow was really, really on a pretty low level, that he has a din rasha, so then we can be makel in the tshuva. Because we're going to get to how they did tikkun tshuva in those days. So we'll take that into consideration when we're deciding what the tshuva should be. And since he never put on tefillin, according to the witness, the testimony, so he's b'chal peish yisrael begufan, so we make a little more. He says, we already know that Rabbi Eliezer of Worms has a Kabbalah, Mishem HaChassid, Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, and you can find this in the Sefer Rikeach HaGadol in the section of Hilchos Tshuva, that the classic Tshuva for Ritzeach is to go in Golos for 3 years with Chashukei Barzel, with chains. The guy has to go in Golos with chains. Kahai Gavna, Chumnas Gedoylas, and a lot more in that vein for 3 years. But since I already said that I did take into account this simcha, this Nissen status, that maybe he wasn't mamish such a great guy, and Simcha is asking tshuva and he's mischaret, so I'm going to be makel a little bit on Simcha, and we'll see what the kula was in a second. And for Nachman, I'm not giving a tshuva because he's bayit with tshuva. He's not even regretting, he's not even asking. So as long as he refuses to acknowledge what he did, you have to announce and show that he's pasul eidos, pasul for a shvua, not to join him for any davar shebekdusha until he expresses remorse and wants a tshuva. And then we'll figure it out, and we'll reach out to Posen, and we'll work it out then. And the following tshuva, he says, now I will be misader the tshuva for Simcha. He says, I don't know him though personally, so if the Lomdim of Posen think that they want to modify it a little bit, I allow them. I leave it up to them. And this is the seder of his tshuva, just to give you a sense of what kind of how they used to paskin them. He says it's going to be, instead of 3 years, we're going to make a big discount. We're going to make it 1 year. 1 year, Shana Tmima, he has to go in Golis, and he has to make it to a shul every day, or at least every Monday and Thursday, because you're walking or schlepping, it isn't necessarily always a shul wherever you are, if you have to be on the move. And he has to make 3 chashukei barzel, 3 metal chains, 2 on his hands, where he did the Aveda, and 1 on his body. And when he goes into the shul, he has to chain himself up and daven that way. And then in the evening, he has to go barefoot into the shul, and get the chazan, which I assume is the shamash, before v'hurachim, and get malchus barabim every day, and say, you should know Rabbi Sai that I'm a ritzeach, I killed Nissen b'mezin, and this is my kapara, and daven for me. And then when he leaves the shul, you should lie down on the step of the shul, and everyone should go over him, but not step on him. Please, let's not get carried away. Then he should take the chains off, and he should also fast an entire year, except on a day when you don't say tachnun, and he shouldn't, even when he is eating, he shouldn't eat meat, he shouldn't drink wine, he certainly shouldn't get drunk, and especially not from the type of alcohol that he got drunk from that caused the whole incident in the first place. And he shouldn't have a pillow or blanket except on Shabbos, Yom Tov, Hanukkah, and Purim. And during the whole golos, he shouldn't cut his hair or his beard. We know, as an aside, that Chachmei Ashkenaz, even in a very early tkufa, used to touch their beard. That's a different topic. Gizeh darkei atshuva. And he shouldn't wash himself in hot water except on Erev Yom Tov, not even on Erev Shabbos. And he shouldn't wash his head more than once a month. And he shouldn't wash his clothing more than once in a while. And he shouldn't hang out where people are drinking, because again, that's where the trouble started in the first place. And he shouldn't be involved in any kind of schoik, playing around, because also that kind of situation is what led to the murder. And if people insult him, he's schlepping along with chains, people say, oh, you're a ritzeach. He has to be quiet, being embarrassed, and say, zeh kaparasi. And he has to be careful with Kriya Shema and Tefillah, and say vidu 3 times a day, the vidu hayadua. And then after that, he has to say, Ana Hashem, please accept my tshuva, was I spilled innocent blood. After the year is over, he should continue fasting every Sheni v'Chamishi, and his whole life, he should be careful. When that month comes, when that day comes, he should fast 3 days. Ritzufim, 3 days in a row, if he's healthy. And if he's weak, then fine, just 2 days in a row. The day of the incident and that night, the guy died, so the 2 days. And his whole life, he should be involved in Pidyon Shvim, Megnulas Chasodim, and Atzalas Nefashis, to try to save other lives in the place of the life that he cut off. And he should come to some kind of agreement with the Yershim to support them with something and ask Mechila and from the Almana, and you should do Tshuva, Naum Yisrael Mebruna. And once he accepts all this, then we can accept him back in our ranks for any Davar Shebekdusha. Right away, as long as he's a Makabal on himself, he's good. That's how they paskin these shilas in the 1400s. Well, I guess you eat at night. Even 3 days with Sufim might mean eating at night.
Every day, every tefillah, or every week?
For more questions, we have to move along. So you can get back to me. So just time to point out, it was Tikkun Tshuva like this that the Alter Rebbe is referring to in the beginning of Geras Tshuva. And the Alter Rebbe says, "Mashinim to Sifrei Musar, Bereisham, Sefer Rekeach, Sefer Chsidim, Harbe Tainis, V'Sigufim La'eva, Krisus and Mrs. Basin." This is the context. This is the kind of thing the Alter Rebbe is talking about. And it seems like this was still practiced halacha l'maisa for a few hundred years, because the Rebbe Chassid and the Rekeach lived around the year 1200. And this tshuva is from the mid-1400s. And the Ramah, who lived in the 1500s, is still writing tshuvas like this, with tikkunim like this. So it seems like at some point along the way, these tikkunim stopped. That's its own topic as well. And Kopanim in Yonenu, we see that they brought up the excuse of shechrus, and he said, it's just not an excuse. Although he actually blames the shechrus when it comes to tikkunim, he says, you have to be careful with the drinking and the mishta, but the mishta is. So he's sort of blaming it, but not in a way where it exempts him. It makes him more responsible. And specifically, but again, that question, he said, it's nothing because Shechrus Shalait, you have to be completely unaware. And like the idea being that the next day you have no clue what happened, and if Simcha knew what happened the next day, so not relevant. So that's one early source that takes aside, offers an opinion on how we determine. The next shuvah is from Rav Aaron Sasson, who lived in the late 1500s. He's a Rav in Saloniki, in Kushta. He has Shalos Shuvas, Teiras Emes. So in that shut in Siman Kufn and Daled, he has the following story. Reuven got upset at his wife, Leah, obviously fictitious names. And he got so angry that he said, I'm a kabbalah myself, Naziris Shimshon Bar Manoyach Bar Delila, with all the details. That I'm not going to use the same bed, just on the topic, but I'm not going to be in the same bed. And I'm not going to eat together with you at one table from today, starting today for a whole year. B'li heter from Shem Chacham Echach Yisrael, even Hataras Malachi Yasharas, and even if they're matir, their Hatarasim shouldn't be Hatara. He had a whole lengthy lashon. Yinamteinu Rabbeinu. Do we have any way out here for Reuven? Because it's a bit of a problem. Also, he says another factor that comes in the shaila is that when already in the Erev Yom Kippur before, he made a meidah, I'll call it Shavuos and Adarim, V'Yisurim, that he's going to makabel the whole year, B'Shas Kaisai. Interesting that he's makabel, that there was a special meidah to mevatel in advance, anything he'll say when he's angry. But when he pulled off this thing, people said, hey, you made a meidah already. So he said, I didn't mevatel on meidah. We got me this. So made it worse. So what do we do with that? So now Nadarim it's a big topic on its own, and it was more common. You see, all the shuvas were full of shilas relating to Nadarim. We're not going to get into it's a very lengthy shuvah that gets into many, many aspects. We're just going to focus on this aspect. He says, even though it's not mentioned in the shaila, that the Torah Sama says, the Baron says, I heard from Edom, and they said that B'Shas the Neder, he was Shasui v'Shikr. He says, "V'kach amruli b'loshen laz burajo." Now, there's no ch sound in Hebrew, and then didn't come up with tzaddik yet back then. So in Spanish, it's buracho. So that's the word they used. Maybe using that word belaz emphasized how wasted he was or something. So I asked them if he drank a lot. They said, well, actually, he didn't drink a lot, but he's the kind of guy that gets very drunk from drinking very little. And we have a lot of people like that. He says. Yeah. So I said, look, it seems like these people didn't know, that you have to read Shechrus Shalait, as I state in Gemara Erevin, and the Rambam in a few places, including in Hilchos Naziris, that if you get to Shechrus Shalait, then whatever you say is nothing, you're not chayav in any Aveda, which the Rambam says there. He says, they didn't know what to tell me. They couldn't answer me. I'm asking, does it reach this level? They couldn't say. He says, and then I realized that one of the reasons why they can't tell me was they were also drinking with him together. So how are you going to know, in that state, who's drunk and how drunk? Also, he says, what is the definition exactly? So he goes to the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Mechira says, and the Rambam defines it a little bit. This is how the Rambam describes it. He doesn't know what he's doing. Ein ma'asav klum, so whatever he does is nothing. But ehu kishaita ekikotin pachas miben shisha. The Rambam makes an analogy to someone who's a shaita or a child less than 6. So now I know that they don't know the answer to this question, and Gamhu, he himself, he doesn't know the answer to this question. He himself can't really speak as to himself. Still, I summoned him just to pursue this line of inquiry. I summoned him and I told him the halacha of Shechris Sholait, because they told me that he's an intelligent guy, there's someone to talk to here. And I said, look, and now that you know the definition, do you think you can tell me whether you roast that I love or not? And then I said, it seems like, judging by how elaborate and amusing the lashon of the Naziris that he said was, it was so many details and so intricate. So it sounds like you were badas. At the end, the thing he said at the end didn't make so much sense, but maybe he didn't know the din. But Soif Dover, he says, I determined that actually it seems like he was mevulbul maturav harbe. He was very maturav at that time. And he said that whole lashon, she says, apparently people like this was something that rolled off the tongue. They knew it even when they were at the most drunk. That was ersh, what they were able to rattle off. So it doesn't prove anything. So this is the situation. He says, the truth is, he says, I am a supik. I don't know really how you define this. And even the Rambam says, "Hu hashikar she'oisa ve'eni yedei ma'oisa." What does that mean? How am I supposed to understand what the Rambam is saying? He says, I can understand it in 2 ways. Does it mean that he's completely unaware that he's doing anything? Or are we talking about a slightly higher level of awareness that he knows that he's doing something, but he barely has no sense of the significance of what he's doing? 2 different things. What is eni yedei ma'oisa? And he says, apparently he seems to say that the analogy to the shaitan, to the katan, suggests both. Like one doesn't say which, but he says one suggests one and one suggests the other. And also he says, B'chlal, when the Rambam said, Hareu k'shaita katan, lav dafka, the Rambam was trying to explain what the gather of a shaita is in terms of the shaita state of mind. It could have just meant that this is the din of a shaita, that the shaita, that the shikar is a din of a shaita. After he was saying that we should analyze the state of mind of each and see how they. That's b'chlal. So even that yeshlis yashiv, if I can even bring a raya from that. And then also we have an issue with the Rambam Hilchos Gershon, where it also comes up, and it says if you gil shechrus shalait for Omar Kisvu, you don't write. And the Ram, there's 2 gersayos. One argues, he says, if you didn't reach that level, harez a suffix. And we're not sure whether to write it or not, because maybe sometimes we have even a lower standard of shichrus. And the Torah, though, it says, Haya hadavar suffix im higil shechrus shalayt harez a suffix. I'll go for it. You're not sure whether he reached that level. So in Yundina, which one do we follow? He says the Yosef already pointed this out in Eben Ezer, Siman Kuf Chaf Aleph. And also you have the Rambam in Kedushin, Hilchos Ishus, the Rambam says, Shikar Shekidish Kedushin Kedushin, V'megillah Shechrus Shalayit, En Kedushin Kedushin, but the other Rambam adds, Misyashvim B'davar Zeh. This is something that we have to sit and figure out. It's Kedushin, it's not like anything else. So, what does that mean? What does Misyashvim B'davar Zeh mean exactly? What are we trying to figure out, and how are we trying to figure it out? Which already the Beis Yosef already pointed out. So that's that subject of his discussion. Then he goes off to other things, and towards the end, he mentions again, it seems like he's listing it as one of his reasons to be makel, ultimately. So it seems like, ultimately, he was willing to accept the idea that Shechrus Shalayt might apply here, based on how he discussed it with this guy, that it's Shayach, Simon Tzad the Metzias, Simon Tzad the Din. But Lamaise, it was still very troubling for him to be able to come to Maskana, because these types of Nidarim, avoid them, tip. But you see also that when it comes to this question, he didn't mention that Hagdara of Marinit Bruna, and he got very tied up in what the Rambam's words actually mean and how you're supposed to define it. Seems very unclear. However, we also find Fakert. When it comes to Piskei Din about a Shaita, you also have big questions of how do you define a Shaita. And I believe I saw in the Tzemach Tzedek where he seems to make the reverse analogy. You want to understand what a Shaita is, look at Shechrus Shalit and any Idea Ma'isa, so that can tell you what we mean when we say a Shaita, because there are lots of Dargas and Shaita. Following Tshuva is from Rabbi Yom Tov Tzahalon. He's also known as the Maharitatz. He lived in the late 1500s, early 1600s. He's a Talmud of Yosef Karo, more or less around the same time as the previous one. So he says the following story. Reuven lived in Saloniki, and he had a chotzer, and he had houses, he had real estate, and he owned this property. He went to live in Eretz Yisrael, because it wasn't that far, so people were moving back and forth. Then he came back to look after his properties. Now, he belongs to Kehilas Kodesh Calabria. So that could be a little confusing. Is he in Saloniki or is he in Calabria? But the answer is that there was an Italian diaspora community in Saloniki. Okay. So his friends, when he came back, when he dropped into town, his friends made a big party for him. And he had a good time. And while he's having a good time, the Bnei HaKohol, they start nudging him. They say, look, Shimon, the other guy, he's being makdish as nechasav. He's given endowments to tzedakah. Why don't you give your chotzer to Chevras Mishnet Torah? That was a chevra. They already had societies, whatever it was involved with exactly. Obviously, some aspect of learning. Why don't you be makdish your whole chotzer, your whole property to Chevrat Mishnat Torah? Now, Reuven was in a very good spirit due to all the drinking. So the Edom from Kehilas Kodesh Calabria who were there, who also happened to be the Parnasim of Chevrat Mishneh Torah, coincidence. So they said, yeah, we were there, we saw Reuven Midaita Yiratzainoi gave a matana Mehayoim Ula'achar Misa to the Hekdesh of Chevrat Mishneh Torah and Saloniki, all the schos and shibud, etc., in his chotzer with all the houses and the attics, small, large, and small, all the way down, it all belongs to Chevrat Mishneh Torah, Matana Gemura, and they signed the star right then and there. They were very good about that, and it has the Tzizos of Kinyan. Next day, Kasher Sor Yenim Reuven recovers a little bit, and he finds the people of his community, and he says, watch it. Don't you write anything about that matana that I said yesterday, and don't sign anything, because I never really wanted to be makdish anything. And whatever I said was Mishnah and Lemidah Shlema. But that didn't stop them. And so they wrote it down in Kislev in the year Shin Samach. And that's the year 1600. And they left it in their records. Ultimately, there's more details. Ultimately, Reuven passes away somewhere else, and his family had been in Eretz Yisrael this whole time. They're Bechal not on the scene. So the Chevra Torah, Mishnah Torah from this Kahal Calabria, they went and seized the chotzer, and now they're collecting all the rent. And they're not just collecting it; they're using the money. The money's not around anymore, and no one's there to stop them because Reuven's Yarshim are not there. Now, Reuven's Yerushalayim are oblivious, and they're wondering why they're not getting the schirus, the rent in the mail. And they finally sent someone down to find out what's going on. And he finds that the Parnasim have made themselves quite at home in the Chotzer. And they take out the Shtar Matana, and they say, get out of here. Yerush, you know Shaykhs. We have it. It's ours. And it's him against all the Parnasim. And he tried being Tevei them Ladin. They said, we have a Haskama. Kahal Kadosh Calabria has a Haskama. You have to go to Ar Chacham. You can't go anywhere else. So what happened with that? So anyway, we start going through the tinus of the Yerush. So the question reaches the Maritatz. One of the tinus was, the last tiny says that besides for all the other problems with the Shtar, with the Edom, with this, with that, he says that because it was M'teicha Chilu Mishnah, and right afterwards he said, he retracted it. And everyone, even the Eidim of the Matan, agree that it was, of course, within the context of the Michael Mishta, and they agree that he said the next day, no one's denying those facts. So that was one of the tainas of the Yerush. So Maritat says that I was looking at his tainas, and I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'll say, Dein Hanyan li v'dein le Hanyan, I'll tell you which tainas I like and which I don't. And I'll start, I'm going to start with the last one, which is this taina. So the taina is that he only gave it the Mishnah Hayayin, and then he warned them. So we have Reis and Erevin, Hashikar, Mikche Mekach, Kari Memkar, Over Avera, all the works. Then you have the Rambam, Hilchas Mechira, and he says the Rambam added a kvetch, knech. He says in Megillah Shchus Shalait Vu Oisa, Ve'eni Yedei Ma Oisa, Ein Mais of Klum. So a little more of a definition again. So Nechzei Anan, if we Shchus Shalait, so Mekach is not a Mekach, Matana is not a Matana. If not, then it is a Matana. Now, if we analyze the situation, we'll see Shalai Higel Shchus Shalait. So he combines the Rambam with the idea that we quoted earlier from he doesn't quote Mani Bruna, but he says the same idea. So he says, the Rambam said, Hu Oisa ve'eni yedei ma Oisa. He says, according to what you're telling me, he was Yedei ma Asa, because the next day he came back and said, hey, don't do the thing I told you to do. So is he Yedei ma Asa? Yeah, he's telling them the next day, I take it back. Yeah. So
He also said don't make a shtar. She didn't know that he made her anyone.
That's not his business. It's not he didn't. You're saying I have to know how the shtar was made. I didn't get into that. It seems like he might not have actually written it. They wrote it up, and they said that it's per his request. It's not.
You have to have signed the shtar. If you didn't know the shtar, you didn't sign it.
So I'm not sure. I didn't get into the problem of the shtar and how that worked, but. It seems like there's a good point that he didn't know about that, but at least when it comes to the actual thing, it seems like he knew about it. That it could be that when the wine wore off, they told him what happened, and then he said, "Don't write." That doesn't seem like it. It sounds like the way he described the story was that he said, "Lo tichtavu." Asher Amarti, he didn't say Asher Higiduli. So it sounds like he remembers what he did. So Ibazoi, that's not a Gil Shekush, at least based on whatever you wrote in your Shiloh. So therefore, you should investigate. Maybe the Shiloh wasn't written properly. So find out, did he not know what he was doing? And others reminded him, damn, about it's nothing. And if he remembered, and he said, so then that means that he definitely was with it, and he didn't reach Shekush Shalait. And what if we don't know, one way or the other? So then, Ta'ninan L'Yodesh. We could tie him after the Yodesh, Lahamid Karka Chiskasa, and we'll say that he was a Shechus Shalait, and therefore it stays in its Chazaka. And he said, Al Tichtavu, we'll assume that others must have told him. Although that itself, we can say, Adrabe, Hamid Shtar Chiskasa, because it's a Chazaka that Eidim don't sign a Shtar, LMK Nasa Begodel. So there you could say, LMK Nasa Beshafli. Chazaka, they won't make a shtar if the guy is completely shekhrus shalait. That's like a cotton, and it's the same chazaka. There's yesh leimar that these eidim don't have a chazaka because they're negeya be'edus, because they're all part of on the scheme, and that's the chelak hanegel in Yinenu, and weiter, very lengthy tshuva, getting into all the tainas. Seems like ultimately he sided with the kahal, but in Yinenu. So we see he's really seizing on what we saw earlier from Mani Bruna, the idea of the test is, and he doesn't see this as a steer to the Rambam, the test is whether he's aware of it the next day on his own or not. Now, a lot more recently, closer to our times, we find that someone challenged this, and that's Rabbi Leo Bechor Chazan. He lived in the late 1800s, passed away in 1908. He was from Turkey. He was based in Yerushalayim, Chacham Bashi in Libya. He was Chief Rabbi of Alexandria, different stages. And he has a sefer called Shazat Shuvis Talmud Slave. So in Yed Adaya, Siman Lamed Aleph. So he has the following story. I was asked that a very terrible incident happened, that the Bachar Echad Nishtakar Harbi Moed, and while he was under the influence, Shasa Sam Hamavis. Pretty horrible thing to realize. And when his shikras wore off, the poison was kicking in, And he realized that he's B'tzara Tzrura. So he ran to the doctor and he said, please save me. And he was crying. And he said, Vidui. And he passed away that day. No. So. And at that time and at that place, they still stuck very much to the halachas of Ma'aber Atzma Ladas. So they said, we're going all the way. We shouldn't do Tara. Shouldn't do Avelos. They didn't let his father say Kaddish, Hashkava. They didn't allow him to do Adlakas Ner, to stand in the Shura, nothing. And everyone is saying, why? There was popular backlash to this psak. Didn't seem right. How could this be the din of Al Pitayra? So he says, therefore I'm investigating this Shaila. He says, I also, Gam Anoichi Shamati is Nakas B'nai Yisrael. And it seems like this is going too far. Against Kavod HaChaim, against even the Kavod HaMes. And as your question indicates, it says the Shaila is a Chatzi Tshuva. You're indicating what the issue here is. But investigated, and it says the father is asking if he can say Kaddish at least till the end of the year at this point, and to do a Hashkava. So I told him, Kayasif, Kayosef, do whatever you can to help the neshama of this person that happened. Ula Yosher Hashem, and Hashem will accept him, B'Seser Knafav. But anyway, so now to get into the actual discussion. So Seif Aleph, he has a number of, as many of the Shaylas have, there are various aspects, but the Seif Aleph is that doesn't have this din. She quotes the Gemara in Erevin, of course, that Shechus Shalait, etc., etc. And then he quotes the Maritatz that we had just before. And he says, Maritatz said the definition is that Kol Zoicher Le Mikri. Now, in this case, we know that the person, the Bacher, was aware of it afterwards. So he says, V'lo yadati, I challenge this. V'lo yadati, where did he get this from? Could be Rishas Ma'aseh, he had no idea. And afterwards he remembered. That seems perfectly logical and reasonable to Luma's Lev. They both could be true. You could mamish have no idea at the time, and somehow we'll still remember it later. He's befalp a little bit about Loit himself, because right, but Loit himself, Chazal say, did have an idea what's up. So that's a part of, I'm not delving into that, but that's part of his discussion as to what actually is B'chlal together of Loit. He throws in actually that Loit, in his opinion, was also sleeping, which is not Pashat, and he gets challenged on that in a later Shaila. He says, it was Shikr V'yashin. And then there's the Shaila B'chlal and Halacha, if someone who's even a Shikr V'yashin, but Yerek HaChetz, maybe that's something that a person would feel even under the most extreme situation, so you should, sometimes, some Shuvas even say that an Isha who was Shikr should have known, or whatever, was sleeping, should have known, should have been able to feel that. So that's its own discussion. But he says, to this, to my point, he says, Yesh Lahavi from coming out of a Shachta L'Rab Zera. He says, Pshata Sugya, this is the way I understand it. He said it's a Tmus Raya. Later he mentions it. He said it was a Tmus Raya. The way I understand it was is that no one else was in the house at the time. Otherwise, how did this happen? Someone should have stopped them. So, Vadai, they were alone. So how did he know what happened the next day? The next day he's already asking for Achman. So Muzman Zagan that he remembered himself the next day what happened, and he davened. And yet we're not looking at Rabba as a murderer. So Muzman Zagan that he didn't know what he was doing with Shas Ma'aseh, but yet the next day he knew what happened, and I said, but like that's one discussion that he has, and he wants to Taina that perhaps late knew. And he's saying what's the time to Rabba and Reb Zera as well, that can't say that he knew what he was doing b'shas ma'aseh chas v'shalom, but somehow the next day he did know. And he says Puk Chazi, he says go check it out. Kama shikayim sheb'shas shechrusam layadim ma'ika avdi, they don't know what they're doing. Ubayayim him boishim meyatzmam alamaysim shasu, and the next day they're very shameful about what they did. So he says, you tell me a svara, I don't relate to the svara. I don't see where my Tatz's idea comes from. So there's no raya. Anyway, in this case, there's no raya. Even if you go with maritat. So with maritat, it's something that if he remembers, that means that he remembered on his own. In this case, the guy drank poison. So even if he had no idea what he did, but he comes back to himself and suddenly he's in the throes of death. So if you put two and two together, you start realizing that something horrible must have happened. And he goes on and discusses it. We're not going to do too much. And he goes through other shaylas that are involved there. He expressed tshuva and charata in between committing the act and dying. He expressed tshuva and charata. And does he need a sira b'chlal? What? So that's the whole discussion he gets into. And Lamaisa, as he said in the beginning, he was makel. He said we should treat this person like a regular person. Then in Simon Beis, he responds to someone by the name of Eliyahu Azriel, who responded point by point, and he responds point by point to each point. So, and this apparently goes in the other order. So towards the end, the Eliyahu Azriel said that you were asking about maritats, and you have a problem with it. I don't see what your problem is. They go back and forth on the question of light, what light did know, what light didn't know. And he says, that I still hold that just because someone knows what he did, in his response, he says, just because someone knows what he did, that's not a proof. At the Ikar, he says, to him, the Rambam and the Torah is at odds with that. When the Rambam said, Kol she'asa maisa, that person wouldn't do, b'shleimus daitoi, that's shekrus shalayt, because it's compared to a shait and a cotton. A shait and a cotton do things that are not b'shleimus daitoi. That's how we understand it. So Ibazaya, it's a much lower bar to say that someone reached Shekros Shalayt like a shait and a cotton. And he's been signed to do the aim, which we're going to get to in a moment, to the Bach, which we're going to get to in a moment, and to others. And he says, you tained that when it comes to Kamrav of a Shachtel at Abzeda. Second. You said that you don't see it as a raya. No, I also said it's just a dmus raya. Explain it different ways. Fine. So that was that back and forth. So the Talmud Lev was challenging the maritats, although Lav Dafka was negay l'maisa anyway, as he said, because in this case you could say that who says he remembered? It could be he realized on his own when he felt what was going on. So that's, to some extent, that is the discussion regarding the Hagdara, which, as we see, is not fully clear. Now we're going to move on to the discussion of, is it taka true, as the Ramah asserted, that if someone reached Shechrus Shalayit, that they are able to get away with impunity for whatever they do. So the first shuvah is from the Re'im, the Yom Mizrahi, who lived in the late 1400s, early 1500s, a little further from Marim Bruna. He's already considered like the beginning of the Achreinim, where he lives. Of course, we know the Mizrahi was chief rabbi in Turkey. Pirush Mizrahi and Rashi is one of the Ikar Pirushim and Rashi, etc. So Mizrahi says, I was asked about a shikar, Charav the Gideif is Eishes Kroivai. This guy got very drunk, and he started up with his relative's wife. V'amar, and he expressed himself, Shetime Oisa ve'as ima. That which is it's interesting, how drunk, say certain drunk people express themselves, not nishkenaya zach. That's how people talk. So that's how he expressed himself. Stam, just trash talking. So what should we do? All right. So he says, he says, I accept that he was shikuk shechrus shaloit. So ein mishpat moves leish hazeh. I don't know if he means that literally, but you shouldn't go too far. Says, even when it comes to mamish karas and Mrs. Based-in, if it's shekar shaloit, kedushin, she's mamish mutal kol adam, kedushin are nothing. So he says, when it comes to this guy, I said, a lot of people are ready at a dime to start talking this way when they get the opportunity. even when they're drunk, these Lashonis, they come to them easily. They're able to rattle them off effortlessly. So Allah has come that we should take that into consideration. And if he was mamish shafui, even then, and he said that he committed a murder, he did an aveda, a person is not nema, and he's potter from everything, he's on nifsal me'edus, and even if he said that he stole something, in which case we do say he's chayav to pay, it's still palgin and dibur, you have to pay, but he's still kashal edus. So that's even if he's shafu, koshkan in the dan, he, I no idea what he was saying, so there's no din ba'elam, not malchus, not misak, if he didn't do Gemara. He says, so this is, we get to the question of, so what do we do if someone has this excuse? On the other hand, he did something that was, extremely improper. So it says, Anachnu atzad hageder, we're going to be menade someone. This is, he's talking about someone who's b'shafli. So if someone is b'shafli, he wouldn't have any din, but yet we would be menade him. Why? You can't just talk about B'nai Yisrael like that. What? Let you get away with that. But because in this case it was Be'ez Shechruso, and he keeps on adding that this is something that all Mishtakrim seem to say for some reason. So how can we jump 2 dargas all the way up to Nidui? Jumping too high, so you have to go a step down. Nagda, Malkus, which is something that they used to still do. So Hu Kibel Olabes Hadin, and he fell down before the Maimud that were there, and this happens to be that the person that was upset didn't want to let him get away with just Nagda, Blaine is pious, but the Venishra Adavar Kach, I guess that's that, and that's and he signs his name. So that's that situation. It's interesting, B'chlal, the attitude towards women, B'nai Yisrael, Hefker, and the response to that kind of behavior. But in Yonenu, he accepted that the guy was Shikah and Afal Pikain. He says that doesn't mean that you just get away without repercussions. And the fact that it's something that Shikarim commonly do, on the one hand, he's using it as a way of defending him. It could be Shikah, and yeah, it's very common. On the other hand, he's saying we don't want, it's a problem, so we have to do something about it. Now, the big central source on this topic is the Bach. Rabbi Sirkis lived in Poland in late 15, early 1600s. And this gets back to how we started, Hezek. He starts off, Oid Loi, apparently behemshich to the previous tshuva. The previous tshuva is Lepni Harav Chassid Rebleid. So Oid Loi, also to him, Maisa was, Reuven was at Sudas Chasim Mekala, Sheva Brachas, or whatever. And the Zorak Schuchas El HaKaisel Keminig HaShoisim, he threw glass at the wall, as one does. And V'teich Simcha. And Shimon Tainez that he lost an eye as a result of that shattered glass. So the Bach says, right, so he says, what I understand is what you're saying. The child didn't spell it out. So I understand what you're saying is that the glass flew from the wall to his eye, and Shimon says that glass then in turn is what took out his eye. So that's what's the chalal din of Hezek in this case. So you have in the Mishnah, Hamaniach, Hamavakeya, B'Rishus Arabim, and pieces fly into the Rishus Yachid. And the Gemara talks about a guy who walks into a carpenter, Shaloi B'Rishus, and the carpenter is chopping wood, pieces of wood are flying, and it flies into his face and kills him. The Nagar is potter. But if you want to with Rishus, then the Nagar is chayav. So you have to be careful when you're causing splinters to fly. That if it's Rishus, you know that there are people there. You have to be responsible. And you have this in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Tav Chaf Aleph. Chayt is referring to the Torah, and he brings it as a shita that holds that if the Nagar is an Uman, then even if he doesn't see someone coming in, he's chayiv, because a Nagar is an Uman, should be a professional. He shouldn't have those kinds of splinters flying into customers walking in through the door. It says, and certainly in this case, we know what happened, and it's fakir. It is Ra'uhu, because they're all sitting at the party together. It's not like Reuven didn't know where he was. He sees where he is. And the Beveis HaChasan, where there's many people, and the throwing is a form of Shalei B'Rishos. Not sure how that applies here, but the point is he threw. It's like this case, and this is a house with a lot of people. So, and even if there was a certain rishus to throw it, because there is a concept of breaking glass at chasana to take away from the simcha. He says, and the Ein Suffolk, he says, by the way, he goes off on a little tangent, Ein Suffolk, that from that case in the Gemara, that's where we have this crazy minute that's driving us crazy, that everyone keeps on throwing glass at walls, and it keeps on causing, or could cause hezek. He says, Ein za minig vasikim. This is not, because it's from the Gemara, minig vasikim. He says, this is minig ruim gazlonim atikim. That's the kind of minig this is. He says, the Kadmonim, when they broke glass, but Yishuv Adas, they did it within the Hagdaras, within the Gedarim, and it didn't cause hezek. And Haiman, the boy, the Kai Milad and Azik, you have to be careful. But these people say there might be causing suffering sequential fascists, because the Gemara says that an eye injury in particular is on Shabbos is very urgent because the heart is connected to the eye. But you're also being Mechal Shabbos by doing this. This is happening on Shabbos. And the Gilu Berada, no, we break the glass under the chuppah. That it's not like that. They didn't have that form of the minig yet. The minig was ready to break the glass under the chuppah. So what's all this extra glass shattering for? So Mamela, it's not like you were doing the right thing when you did this. It was shalei b'rishus in that sense, that completely uncalled for. So therefore, it's not that. It's not stam dini nezek. Surely you're chayav b'dal dvarim. Although you're potter for the baishas, because you only chayav on baishas if it was deliberate. Here it wasn't. Yitaina that he has Yitaina he was shikar. It says, I think it's not a taina. It says in Perek and Erevin, it says shikar, etc. until shikar shalei potter mikulam. And Cheshemish, but also in simulation lam and hey. Quotes from the Rambam, who sha'isem in idea ma hu'esa re'ukashaita. So the Chayra Bazoi, if he was shikar shachruz shaleit, he's like a shaita. And we know what's the din of a shaita l'gabi nezek. P'giyas and ra. So chayra shaita v'katan, they cause it. It's your loss. Try to avoid them. He says no. Loihi. When the Gemara said that your potter, it was specifically referring to what it was talking about there, which was Makach Memkar and Misa and Malkus. Those were the cases mentioned in the Brisa of what a shikr is chayav for, unless the shikr is a shalit. But the Gabi Nezek, he says, the Gemara wasn't talking about Nezek. Ein Safek the chayav, because now he's not responsible, but your responsibility began when you started drinking. You should have been careful not to mishtaka kelait. And to mazik the rabbim, mi ansay l'shtaker kol kach ad l'yad, my cover, who forced you to reach that state. And since it's all ultimately, the oinus is ultimately his fault, he's chayav. And b'chal we see adam mud la'olam, right? So a person is sleeping, and it's impossible not to sleep. You got to sleep. It's not my fault. I shouldn't have. It's like here we're saying you shouldn't have drank. You can't say you shouldn't have slept. And yeah, you're chayav ben azaken. So for sure, shikras b'shei gomer that you reach this state through your own behavior. And anyway, there's a vart of niskel. If you trip and you cause damage while you're falling, so the mayor in Haminiach says pesheya niskel is pesheya. And so the male that would also be like this. I chacham disagree and say niskel is not pesheya. Fine, there the guy taka tripped. You didn't plan to trip at all. Completely caught you by surprise. So you can't be careful while you're tripping. But here, where you went into it willingly, so Mamela, davar pashut le'toiba barbe rav d'chad yoma. No one would make such a mistake. Then it gets off into the whole question of whether a chedesh sheta v'kata, and if they ever outgrow their situation, a katan gets older, or a chedesh and sheta, something happened, they got better. Are they chayav to pay afterwards? So he says, you have a goyas ashri that says that a katan is chayav l'shalom when he gets older. And there's a case of, in Perek HaGoyes Leitzim, of Rafram and Rav Ashi. It says, Kafye Rafram Rav Ashi, that Rav Ashi burned the star of his friend when he was young, and Rafram was kaif for him, and he was gaiver from him. So, based on this, they seem to be saying that the Goyes Ashri B'Shem Rashi, based on the Gemara, that the cotton is chayav l'shalom k'shiyagdo, which is its own question, of course. The Rambam Taka says in Ilchos Geneva, befeirish that you're not chayiv l'shalom, and that's the psak in Choshen Mishpat, Torah and Shulchan Aruch, not like the Gos Ashri. No, he says, B'chlal, says, now that I'm talking about it, you can actually teach for Kurt that even if Rashi is Taka saying that it was Bi'al Dusay, B'kat Nusay, but not, Rashi wasn't trying to say that you're actually mamish chayiv. If you do something when you're a child, it become chayiv. No, if you're not a ben das, when you did it, you're part. The whole act was not an act. Why would you become chayiv once you get older? So what's the pshat? Kafia means that when you have a child who's burning people's shtaris, so one of the things you can do is you can beat the kid up and tell him, this should be a lesson to you not to do that again, because kids understand that, apparently. So that was what the kafia meant, that he wanted to hit him, and because Rashi didn't want to get hit, so he said, instead I'll pay. This is the fact that explains the Rambam. In Hilchos Geneva, the Rambam says, the question is, where did the Rambam get this from? Because Muslim Zagan, from this Gemara Taka, that he was hitting him as a child, and that's how he ended up getting the money from him. Upon that's the side discussion, but Filim Tim Tzaleimar, that it was Shikha Kishachris Shaloit, and even if you want to say that his Pater ben Izakin after he recovers, but even according to this, he'll still be Chayiv Makas Mardos, and if he doesn't want to get hit, he will have to pay, just like the way he understands Rashi. And anyway, is to get back at the end to say that anyway, I already said that you are responsible. It's not like a cotton where you're not responsible, and the question is, what are we going to do with you? In this case, you're responsible anyway. And this is when they testified that he was so shook, he didn't know what he was doing. And if he doesn't have Eidim that say that for him, why should we just assume that for him on his behalf and then give him an easy time? So if there are no Eidim, or there's a contradiction, there's 2 against 2, so he's chayiv to pay all 4 because he has to bring a raya. Because he says, Kivin shestam b'nei adam yoidim asher yisim b'shechrusan. Stam a person, he says, is aware of what they're doing. It's a milsa, the leishchicha, the Bach says, to mamash have no clue what you did. So Mele, you prove it. We're not going to assume that for you. You can't just come and claim that. And even if you claim that it is common that people do this, which might be a debate, so he says, still, it says in Bab Metzia, Tanya Isi, Ein Roya, Shavuos Hashem Tia Ben Shneim, Ha Yesh Raya. If someone sees what happens, then you can't swear, then you have to bring a raya. So people witnessed this. So Amela, the raya is on you. Everyone saw what you did. You have to bring a raya that you were not liable, you're not chayav. This brings us back to the question of what happens when the Edom are also a little, but they're not that far gone. So we say that they were witnesses. This is all the Mosa. As I already said, that you're chayav medina because it all ultimately is resulting from what you did to begin with. And you tie it. What about the simcha shel mitzvah? They say that we started all the way off with that sometimes when there's some matzav of simcha, you can get away with stuff. He says, Nidaliyah, it's only when it's a small hezek, something that's reasonable, even if it's an injury, but a little, a wound that heals. But something like this, to take out an eye, to take off an aver, or even a big hezek in mammon, pshita, that of course you're chayev, there's no din minig, that there are times when you can get away with things like that. Klal ha'oila, that this mazik has to pay our dvarim, but again, Beishos is potter because it's not miskaven, doesn't have, you can pay later. So this is the Bach's taina. So kumtois is that late the Bach doesn't really matter so much whether the shechus is shalait or not, because ultimately you're chayev for these types of hizekas. The Mishnah Brura in Hilchos Purim quotes this in Hizik. It says when Ramah says in Hizik your potter, the Mishnah Brura says but Bach, and he means this: Machalik bein has a gadol a cotton bein meguf bein memamin the has a gadol makpidin. Ein minig lifter, but has a gadol was never a minig to potter for anything too big. And Amos. Those who are Matzayin, and remember places that even before the Bach, the Marshal, who's the time of the Ramah, in the 1500s in Poland, so he writes in Yam Shleim and Masechus Baba Kama that the shikr, even if it's shikr shaloit, is chayiv and tashlumin for all the hazekas. Ayat says in Erevin he's pater medina shemayim for those avedas, but you still get your punishment for not holding yourself in. Meshikar atzmil hishtageya, you drank yourself into oblivion. That's your fault. That's so lepoitrem didn't hazek shemaz lechaveri pshita shechayev. Adam word lo'elam. And it says them kain le'shavkas chaya. Also, back to the point about like how deliberately are you even planning this in the first place? Itainis shekol seine yishtav yishtakar al chaveri lazika v'yifter. Every time you want to really get away with something, get away with crimes, so you drink yourself into a blackout, and then you somehow remember what you wanted to do without knowing what you're doing.
Like Chaim Rosa said that you could say whatever you want.
Yeah. It says about that, and the Marshal goes a step further. It says about feel of Purim, the mechuyev l'ishtaker. Actually, mechuyev. What do you want me to do? I'm supposed to drink. Kamakim in kavanas rabbeinu kadesh yishtageya. He says it's not pshat that you should drink until you get violent, but the Ram says tzarech l'ishtaker liyas nirdim b'shechraseinu. It seems like the way he understands it is not that it's Ram is saying to be less drunk necessarily. Drink a lot, get very drunk, but you're going into it with the kavana. The kavana of how you go into it has a big impact on how you behave. And the male is someone who goes in l'ishtageya, so it's his fault, and someone who goes in to be nirdam, that's it. He says, when I get to Megillah, I'll talk about it there directly, V'sume, Rabbah, but we don't have the Yam Shloime on Megillah. It's a whole subject of the missing Chalak of Yam Shloime, whether some of them do exist and are hiding somewhere. And he adds also, if you said insulting things, which we see all people were much more makbid on, and the next day he says, I don't know what I did, so he has to be a kabel, but Rabbi Taka didn't know, and say, even though I don't know what I did, I'm a makish mechila, and if he does it too much, then you have to be machmir, depending on the situation. Talmud Slave earlier also got into the Bach and debating this, he also challenges the Bach a little bit on this. We're not going to get into that. Other Makaitis, it's impossible to get to everything. But in light of all of this, to go back to the Mechir Yayin, it's interesting to see what the Ramah said in the Mechir Yayin, that essentially you are going in with a certain kavanah, not a kavanah to do actual things to actual people, but you're sort of aware that you're going to be doing things that are wrong, and therefore it's kedai. So the Ramah is taking a certain position on that. It's not clear if the Bach and the Marshal completely disagree, or maybe the Ramah only holds by Purim. Taka, like the Marshal said, Purim Sef Kosef is a chiyuv, so maybe only Purim. Just in conclusion, in the last few decades, the base of Kapach printed for the first time the Shalas Tshuvas Ra'avi Abad. So that's the Avram Rabbi Yitzchak was the Av based in of Narban. He's known as the Ravid Hasheni and different Rosh Hashanahs like that. He's the author of the Eshkel. He's the Baal Eshkel. We find a Maisa that happened on Purim itself, and apparently it was quoted very bekitzer in the Torah and Cheshem Mishpat at the end, Siman Tav Chav Hey, which deals with punishments Bizman Hazeh. And now we have the full tshuva. He says, K'toiv leiv Moshe Bayayin. Moshe was having a good time on Purim. He murdered someone. So what do we do? What's the story? So he says he's not chayiv misa in the situation. We don't know if he reached Shechruz Shalayit, he says, but Cheskas Purim, Roiv Amei Ha'aretz Mishtakrim. I don't know if he means Amei Ha'aretz like that, or he's just using the lashon of the Megillah. Roiv Amei Ha'aretz Misyadim. Rabbi Amei Ha'aretz Misyadim. So everyone's drinking. So Yesh Litlas Hadavar Lahatzu. That would be like a factor. Like if we're being down to the nefashis, we can like throw in that factor that we're not sure. It goes into different pratim relating to being dan punishments with man hazeh. We know in time of the Goyim and some Rishonim they were dan mamish chiv misa or cutting off limbs, things like that. So he says in our situation also we have the chayav inish lebesume, and we have the ma'asim gemara of kam rava. As this guy says, says this guy. So we see there's already precedent for murder on Purim. This guy, Taka Loy Zacha Lahachis Asameis, he couldn't pull off the other half of the thing where you bring the guy back to life. But ultimately, Rabbi was guilty of the same thing. So in Lo Einshu B'din V'Tzeach Mezit. He says you're going to tie in this guy. Made some moves afterwards that seem a little. It says shesachar ushpizoi. He paid off the host not to talk about it. So that doesn't seem like the behavior of an innocent person. It sounds like a pretty guilty kind of person. But, you know that if it gets back to the authorities, the non-Jewish authorities have different ways of paskening. So and anyway, You're going to say that means he knew what he was doing? No. Shema Hayamaisa, after his wine wore off, he doesn't get directly into the question of, so what does that mean? He just says he didn't know then, he wasn't a Pekach then, and after his wine wore off, he started paying people off. He says you can't really call it a Tzech B'Shegeg because it's not clear what the situation was. It wasn't really a deadly piece of wood. And he was apparently 30 amma away from the victim. So he must have just really hurled a piece of wood very hard and very far and very fast. And somehow that's how he killed him. He says that's like Korav L'Koicha Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol has to be Muvdal, he has to stand out the Koicha. This is exceptional stuff. This is world record material here. So a bit of a freak accident. But on the other hand, we can't let people get away with this kind of thing. People are just going to commit murder and say, it was a shegeg. So there's something called Migdar Milsa. So Mamela, then he turns to that tone and he says, therefore we have to punish him. And there's also a form of Tikkunei Tshuva over here. It's before the Rekeach. But we have to give him Malkus. And he says we have to give him Malkus every day for a year. Look, similar to the other case as well, which also involves Malkus, among other things, every day. 12 months, and then from then on, we forget about it. Just like in Gehenna, he killed him fully, ruled Nekatli Palge with Malkus. And if the Nerzach has some surviving descendants that relied on him for Parnasa, so we have to force this guy to provide for that person, which we find with Baba Bambuta and Hardus, Huki Ba'ena Shalelam, Yelech Vyasik Ba'ena Shalelam. If you extinguish, so you have to do something to repair it. And he has to, again, he mentions this idea of, here's the opposite actually. There, the Marie said not to cut his hair in his beard. Here he says the opposite. He should shave his head and his beard, which is a sign of Avelos, like we find in Eve, until it grows back. So that's also a certain sign, a certain thing you should do. And he should fast as well. Make sure that the fasting works out for him on his level. And and then once we did all of these things, so then it'll be usher to mention it again. Then it'll be mal to mention him kol meritzeach ever again after that. And you punish those who don't follow that. So that is the Sikum. So we explored, we started with the Ramah. After we didn't mention the Shulchan Aruch, with the Ramah that says that it's mamish the kamat the kavana, that you're trying to get away with what you're doing because Shekrus Shalei. Then we saw there's two big discussions. First of all, how do we define Shekrus Shalei? It's not necessarily fully clear cut. And we also saw that Lav Dafka is it angenommen that you just get away with anything. So if you did something very severe, you might quite likely still be considered liable, either a mamish al pidin or at least to be guided together. Just as Samar Makaimis, I didn't base this on what they wrote, but I came in the course of putting this together. I came across that Rav Chaim Rappaport wrote about this topic in Kavitz Aris B'Yurim issue Gillian number 1085. And there's also someone actually put together two big volumes called Shtia V'Shichrus Bahalacha, and many chapters tackling it from all angles, and among others, he also discusses these issues.